Hey guys, this is Jeff with Reference Analog again. We had a ton of great responses to our last video about sound staging, so that led to a few customer questions and text messages and whatnot, and a bunch of different various ideas popped up for videos, and this one came up, and I thought this one may kind of go along with that theme, but at the same time, be a little bit different and pretty interesting. One of the things coming that I've got pretty excited that I'm excited about is I've got like an hour and a half long interview with the guys from DCS where they go through all the various things of the DACs and technology and all of that I'm very excited about. So that one will come in the next couple weeks, and it's going to be a long one. So get yourself prepared to find a good seat for that one. But this week, what I want to cover is analyzing the difference between different pieces of equipment. So we're gonna have to put on the old like analytical hat on this one because this one's not about like sitting and enjoying the process. This is gonna be a little bit of work, right? But it's worth it because at the end of it, you do find that you enjoy the system more by having done the work to get there. And then it makes it easier if you keep to a process. It makes it easier when you go to evaluate something else on identifying differences of if you like that difference or not pretty quickly instead of it being like a 4 hour process every time you try to look at something different. That's not really what you want to have to do. So anyway, we'll go through the process that I use and go through some different tracks and etc., what I'm looking for and whatnot. So I'll start off with talking a little bit about the Fletcher-Munson effect. So that is basically that our human hearing is not linear. Our hearing is not as sensitive to low frequencies and it's not as sensitive to high frequencies. And it changes based on volume that we're hearing on the sensitivity of those bands. So in like the recording engineering side, they generally say to record or to master at around 80 dB, something like that, because that's where that effect is minimized. And you're gonna, if you crank up the volume, it's not gonna be overpowering because of where you set the levels at. And if you turn it down to low level listening, it's still going to exist, right? So when we're listening to a component, we need to be in that sweet spot for volume also. So I highly suggest that guys listen anywhere between 78 and like 83. We don't want to listen to that to 120 dB and completely constrict our ears and compress them and everything. And we also don't want to be listening at like 40 dB where we're not actually like hearing enough into the mix, and that frequency sensitivity becomes a problem. So anyway, that's about where we want to be on that. When it comes to the different pieces of equipment that you're comparing, everything has different levels of gain. So you're going to want to level match it a little bit. Even a few dB can make you like something better than the other. Now, the problem will be is some things, the mid-range might be more like drawn out, right? And another piece of equipment, the upper mid-range versus the lower mid-range is more exposed. And so when you're playing music, sometimes the SPL meters are the same in some areas of the song, and other areas, if it's different enough pieces, one is boosted. And so I would suggest using like just some pink noise or something like that, and comparing the two products, getting them matched, SPL. That can be a very quick process. Grab your cell phone, grab an app out of there, an SPL app. It doesn't have to necessarily be accurate. It just has to be consistent. So anyway, get an idea, look at the volume knob. If you're at 43 on one and you might need to be 45 on the other to make them the same or as close to the same as you can get, then go ahead and do that. So as we go through the process, we've got the level matched, we're at the right volume range that we want to be at. Now, what are we doing in the chair? I personally don't suggest taking notes. I don't suggest you do anything. So don't be looking for that next song that you're going to play. Don't be reading a review. Don't, be scrolling through online while you're trying to analyze this. This is an active listening, function. So you need to have nothing else going on, and you just need to be focusing on listening to what you're hearing, right? The tracks that you play, I want you to keep them to under a minute. So we're talking 45 seconds, a minute 15, I don't like, but right around a minute, right? So we can be a touch over, but we really want to be around that minute range. The next thing is once you're in the chair, you've picked your songs. If it happens to be like a source or something like that, don't plug one source into input 1 and one source into input 2 and go 30 seconds of this song, and then I'm going to flip and do 30 seconds of the other, like of the, on the next component, right? We want to replay that same 45 seconds on both pieces the same. So you listen to that first one, 45 seconds in, you think you've analyzed it, go ahead and hit input 2, start the track over so it stops the music, and your brain can reset itself when it stops the music, and your ears can reset themselves when it stops the music, and replay that exact same 45 seconds. So if I have found with myself, I cannot tell a difference with anything. If we go A and then 30 seconds into it, we switch to B and we listen to the next 30 seconds of the song, and then we switch back and listen to the last 30 seconds of the song and A again. Like, my brain does not do that. And I always correlate that to those little eye tricks, right? We've all like tried the eye tricks where you stare at this like hyper highlighted picture of colors, right? And then it switches it to black and white, and then you still see all, like, you see the greens and the blues, and you still see everything, but now you're staring at a black and white picture. I find that's kind of what my brain does when I go A, B, A, B, A, B, real fast kind of thing in between tracks, and I don't start the track over and reset myself. I feel like my brain just merges the sounds because it says, oh, this is the same song. We should be hearing this the same. So I don't know if that's how it works or not, but that's my hypothesis on it. So, but I find that if you start it over completely, listen to it again, then you're going to get, the results you're looking for and actually be able to tell the difference. So I'm going to grab my device here to be able to tell you these artist names that I use, because frankly, I don't remember names all that well. So anyway, especially artists and whatnot. So I'm going to mispronounce these. I apologize if these are like your favorites, but one is Kina Grannis, and the track is Iris. It's a remake of, Iris. The next one is going to be Vahtang Beatbox doing Black Betty. And then the last one here is Bozzio, Levin, Stevens playing a track called Duende. So those three each have an element to them that I enjoy. Now, when I'm evaluating things, I've got about 25 other tracks that I will randomly use depending on my mood and depending on if I'm trying to discover something specific in this song. But those three have little elements that I think everybody would kind of be able to pick up on. So in Iris, it's a female vocalist, and it's incredibly pure the first like 1 minute of the song. It's an incredibly pure vocal, and what I find is as things lessen or become improved or whatever, I either get a more and more pure sound to her vocal, or it starts sounding grainy and maybe even a little bit hard sounding or harsh sounding. And depending on, if I've taken a step back or if I've taken a step up, right, in what I'm doing. And I had the realization on this one with a cable demonstration that I was trying to do for myself. And I was listening between a Valhalla, like a Nordos Valhalla cable, and a Nordos Odin 2 cable, right? And when I did the switch, they're similar cables, but the Odin, just everything got a little bit more real feeling. Like her vocal became a little bit more natural, a little bit more real, a little bit more texture. And it, and then with other components that I've tried it in, I got a little bit more grainy of a vocal, and like I got a little harder sounding vocal because it's right on that line of being bright, in certain mixes. So it's an interesting song to try to see where your system's falling, because at the top end, that's an extremely natural sounding recording of her voice. The next one that I mentioned, the beatboxing one. So Black Betty. So this one I put in the mix partially because it's just kind of a fun track. It's all him in one mic, one voice kind of thing. He's making all the sounds. It's beatboxing. So With that though, there's sustained bass notes that he's creating. And so I kind of like listening to these sustained notes, and then there's a punch too. And it kind of lets me know what the speakers are doing, what the system's doing, what the drive of the amplifiers are, and stuff like that. But I'm kind of listening for um, how the system handles that sustained bass, but also some of the dynamics, how the product is handling the bass, and if it's rolled off filling or if it's tight, or how it's handling that. But part of the reason for that in the mix is, in this process, you want something that is a little bit fun to keep you engaged in this work process that you're doing. And the last one is the Bozzio Levin Stevenson track. And that one, there's like a roll, right? It goes, and it rolls out to the right or to the left from the listener, and then rolls back, and then rolls back out, rolls back. So the few things that I like about this one is, one, it is extremely tight in the roll, right? So if there's any smearing and stuff like that, then that kind of conjoins just a little bit, and it doesn't stay quite as separated, and it doesn't stay quite as precise and accurate in that roll out. So another one is, in that roll, we're hearing some soundstage dimensionality changes, right? Or soundstage width and things like that. But everything stays behind the speaker. But one thing I've noticed is it drops or rises in height depending on how controlled the room is. So when in my very controlled room, it will go straight out and come straight back in, right? And as the room loses control, and as the system is pulled farther away from the wall or too close or whatever, I get effects where it comes out and then drives down a little bit, or comes out and then rises a little bit. And neither one of those seem to be right. What seems to be right is it staying level in the mix. But I've had it happen in all three of them in different systems that I've got, in the store. And so it's an element there that you can at least listen for and understand. And then when you hear different things, you can go, oh, that changed that dimension, or, how that responded. So the tightness there, the precision, the darkness between the roll of the instrument, where the instrument went, etc. Another thing is that never goes into the physical speaker for me. So a lot of times when you go hard right, hard left with something, as it pans to one side, sometimes it'll pull forward into the speaker. That one does not. It stays completely behind the speaker the whole time. And so anyway, just a point of reference for that. So those are kind of three of the tracks I use. If I've got something that I want to check the scale of dimension, there's a couple classical tracks that I use for that. And then, there's going to be tracks for you guys that you use already, that you're intimately familiar with, and I would just use those, right? But I suggest finding things that have about 1 minute worth of action at the beginning of the track, because we want to stay pretty short. We're not listening to the whole song and enjoying the mix. We're trying to analyze the mix and understand what's happening. Once you identify what is happening in the two pieces of equipment that you're analyzing here, you can play anything and you won't miss it. So if you find that one piece has greater dimensionality, when you play that piece, everything that you play it with, you're going to go, oh man, yeah, it's there. Every time I hear it, I've got one piece that I demoed a few years ago, and it's kind of popular now, but it's essentially an empty box, and it drives me nuts because it's an empty box with a linear power supply board in it and a Rune Nook, from Amazon. Basically, throw a Nook in there, and that's the computer for Rune. So there's no audio stuff in this box, and it's like $15,000 streamer here. And I did not end up picking up the brand because I didn't like that. But they're changing some stuff in the DSP realm. And every time that I hear something that, like, the piece itself is adjusting DSP without you being really involved, there's a place and time for DSP, but, as a whole here, I don't want DSP being built into my streamer. But at the end of the day, the piece had like an unnatural almost depth. Well, I'm a depth sucker. So my first instinct in this is, oh man, I get more depth, you know? But as I started listening to it, you know, and doing my A/B, I started realizing that it's missing that bottom octave of bass, which a lot of time digital processing, you know, it has losses. And so it was missing the bottom octave of the bass. And then on the top, it wasn't quite as sparkly, you know, but it did gain this like artificial depth kind of feeling. Well, after I figured it out, you know, which took me a bit, you know, to analyze and kind of go, okay, I've walked through enough different tracks here that I'm understanding this. After I got to where I understood it, everything I listened to, I was hearing that same effect happen to. A little bit less bass, big dimensionality, a little bit like, you know, clouded top end. And I think you'll notice that with a lot of pieces when you compare, it's not always just about resolution, but resolution is one of the things that's more obvious, right? And so when you plug something in and this piece just instantly has more detail retrieval than the other piece, that's pretty obvious, but there's a lot more elements going on there than probably just the detail. The detail is going to be the shock and awe factor where you go, oh man, this is so much more detailed. But there's a lot more to pick out from the comparison. And the more that you do these comparisons, the faster you're going to get at them and the more you're going to understand what you are looking for, right? So that dynamic slam. So some products don't have as much dynamic slam. You're going to get to a point where you're like, oh man, one of my priorities is dynamic slam, right? And so now when you listen to pieces, that's going to be one of the first things you kind of are listening for is how much dynamic slam has this new piece got versus the old piece? Well, they might be the same on that element, right? And then you're going to pick it apart a little bit and figure out other things. But when we put on our analytical hat, I think an important thing to remember is when we're done analyzing to take it off. Because at the end of the day, the point is to enjoy the music. Now, some of us, you know, some of you guys are engineers and that's what that's what you love about the hobby is that element. And that's fine. Do your thing, man. Like, you know, pick it apart every day. But I think for the majority, I think that there's an element there of remembering to enjoy the music. And putting on your analytical hat and figuring out differences is needed. And you really want to get good at it and figure it out. But at the same time, you know, remember to enjoy the music afterwards. And if you'll go through the effort of doing that and going through the process of figuring things out, then you're going to be able to create yourself a better system that you personally enjoy more because you're going to understand how it works, understand what different components did what to your system, and then you're going to have a lot better base on your knowledge when you talk about a piece of equipment. You're going to be able to talk about it fully versus another piece of equipment. So when you talk about Boulder versus Audio Research, and I'll talk about two brands that I carry, right? They're very different pieces from one another. And so when you go to get to experience those and you can talk about the changes, if you've never gone through the analytical nature of figuring that out, then you're just going to be able to say, oh, I enjoy this piece more than the other, right? There's a time and place for that, but you want to be able to describe to yourself what it is that you liked about one piece versus the other. So anyway, that's pretty much all I had for you guys. Sit down, turn everything off, focus on the music, and make your swaps 45 seconds to a minute per song. I would keep it to only like 3 or 4 songs. Make your swaps, you know, after a couple, like maybe even like just 2 songs, then make your swap. And you can do this for hours, right? But just keep it to like about a minute per song and like 2 songs in between swaps. When we get out there to like 15 songs or even listening to like 10 minutes of music, you start forgetting some of the nuances that you heard in different elements like attack and dimensionality and things like that. So after you've figured out what it is that you hear different every time, then you can go back and listen for music, right? Like spend a day with one, then spend a day with the other one. And if you like the second day better, then maybe that one you enjoy a little bit more musically. But I will say be careful with long-term engagements like that because I find that people are not registering what piece of equipment they like more. They're registering what mood they're in. So day 2, you may be in a different mood than you were day 1, or the neighbor may be running his air compressor, all day that day. I don't know, and making the noise noisier on your power. So, I find the quick ABs to be a pretty good way to analyze things and then figure out the musicality kind of post sense once you understand what things are doing. So, anyway, that's all I had for you guys today. And we'll catch you next time.